I can, sure. You know, there's, I don't know, you know who Jerry Polikoff is? You know, Jerry's actually the expert on the media, you know, more than anybody else, but I can easily talk about it, sure. Talking about Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite and Peter Jennings and all the nasty bad guys. The problem with the news media through all these years is the fact that they bought into the lie in the first place, whether they were told the truth and told that it was a matter of national security that they had to get involved in this, or whether they just did it on their own. It's anybody's guess. I think there's probably a few from column A and a few from column B involved in this. But once they had done it, they were really stuck. They couldn't say, well, you know, for national security, we lied to you. And then there's others who are just stupid enough to believe the lie in the first place. And then they committed to it. Now they can't back out because it makes them look even dumber than they actually are. And it was easy to get them involved initially. I mean, nobody wanted to believe that anyone had gotten away with this horrible crime. Yet it's clear that Lee Harvey Oswald did not do it. Yet, once they had reported to us, they would lose their own credibility to admit the lie now. There are others who deal with an issue which I was able to release to the public back many years ago. It's a CIA document that was inadvertently released in 1976. It's called National Security Action Memorandum. I'm sorry, no. It's a CIA document, and the CIA document is number 1035-960. 1035-960 talks about how they're going to, the CIA, the government, are going to counter the works of people like myself by using propaganda assets in the media. People like Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, and a lot of others to do editorials against, say, we're all communists, we're all in it for the money, we're all the bad guys, and to basically ridicule the work of legitimate critics. And the document still stands. I've published it now 3 separate times. I'm going to do it again. It's a very, very powerful and important document. It shows how they did it. And the thing is, that was back in 1963, all the way through the 1970s, and it's still going on to this day. Now there's been a series of grossly dishonest documentaries, Unsolved History they're called. There's 3 or 4 of them, and a few others. The special that Peter Jennings did before he died. They are just grossly dishonest. They don't deal with any of the real facts. Every one of them has ignored the testimony of the Dallas doctors, which is important, really important stuff. And they just pretend that those statements don't exist. Every Dallas doctor said the president was shot from the right front. No exceptions. They all said it. And I've got the interviews with them to prove it. And there were nearly 24 of them that said it. Yet the other side just ignores it completely. The single bullet theory is physically impossible. It's not that did it happen or didn't it happen. It could not happen for so many reasons. It would take a half an hour to explain all the reasons why it couldn't have happened. But they still back it to this day. And they'll say, well, we don't know how tall, how high the president was or how low he was. They'll say, we have no way of knowing. Well, we certainly do. There's a photograph taken at the exact moment that the single bullet was supposed to have happened. And you can see exactly how high, it's a profile shot, you can see exactly how high the 2 men were sitting. And when you compare the actual photograph and take the point of entry in President Kennedy's back and Governor Connolly's back, and then you take the diagram done by the government for the House Assassinations Committee, you can see that they moved the wound in the president's back up by, oh gosh, a good 5-6 inches, and the one Governor Connolly down by a good 7 or 8 inches. They just misrepresented the whole thing. When you overlay the diagram with the photograph, it's not even close. So this is the sort of thing that they'll do. They'll have that ridiculous, stupid computer animation thing showing the president turning far too far to the rear. It's a funny thing. Cyril Weck, many years ago, he was really, really getting angry at the defenders of the Warren Commission saying, well, if Governor Connolly was just a little bit to this side, if President Kennedy was just a little bit to that side, it could have worked. He said, if. He said, if my grandmother had balls, she'd be my grandfather. And, that's basically the truth. That's what it comes down to. If is a very big word. So, again, the media never deals with the real issues. They never, in these documentaries, talk to the real researchers in the case. They'll deal with some of the nut jobs, and there are nut jobs on both sides of this issue. And what they'll do is they'll raise these ridiculous issues like shots from the storm drain or the driver turning around and shooting the president. Clearly, these things didn't happen. Nobody with any sense would believe this garbage. But they'll bring those issues up, and then they'll knock them down and say that all the assassination researchers believe this garbage, and they don't. But that's how they'll deal with it. They won't deal with the actual real issues. For instance, the first two shots are fired 1.6 seconds apart. Now, the minimum firing time of the rifle is 2.3 seconds. So those first two shots, even though they both came from behind, according of the four shots that are actually confirmed, of those first two shots, they're fired too close together to come from that rifle, and that just destroys the whole idea of the single bullet theory right there. So they never deal with that. They'll give the overall 5.6 seconds and say, can you get off 3 shots in that time period? Well, my grandmother could. I mean, it's not really a difficult thing to do. You can't hit anything. You can't take time to aim. But it's never been an issue of 3 shots and 5.6. The real issue is those first 2 and 1.6. That's the real issue, and that's what they just totally avoid. The excuse that we get a lot from the media is, if there were something there, don't you think we'd release it? No, I don't. The best way to deal with this, the best example as to why they would do this, is to simply watch what happens with the White House now. If anybody goes up against what Bush says, then they're iced out of the press conferences. They don't get the press releases. They don't get invited there. They survive. These organizations survive on being first. So they've got the information. Well, they just get iced out. They get pushed aside. They become bastard godchildren. This administration is probably the worst in the history of the country for doing that. But they're not unique. I mean, Johnson was doing that. Everybody else has too. So since that's the case, they want to be invited. They want to get the press releases. They want to know what's going on, and the only way they can survive and do that is to cooperate. So that's why they do that.
You talked about the community a little bit. Talked about. Tell me about the state of the research community right now.
The state of the research community now is somewhat splintered. There are some very good people doing some very bad work, and there's some very bad people doing some very bad work. It makes me heartsick to think about some of the stuff that's being said by people that mean very, very well, such as the Zapruder film is a fake. It's a cartoon. It was created with cardboard cutouts on the north side of Elm Street. They're not really people. That's the most absurd thing ever. What these people have done is taken our most important single piece of evidence and they're neutralizing it. The Zapruder film is legitimate, for crying out loud. The darn thing existed from the moment of the assassination. Copies were made that day, which are absolutely frame for frame the same thing as the original. There's no change except that a couple of frames were cut out by Life magazine. But you can compare original copies that nobody could have gotten their hands on with the original film, and they're absolutely the same thing. If you were to fake the Zapruder film, you'd have to fake the Nix film, the Muchmore film, the Bronson film, all of them, exactly the same way. It's absolutely physically impossible to do it. I'm a photo analyst. It's what I do for a living. It's what I've been doing for a living now for decades. I've handheld the original film. I know it's legitimate. There's no question about it. Yet there's books out there. There's craziness talking about the Zapruder film being faked. That hurts us. It hurts us badly. There are legitimate researchers that have done good work that are going off in other directions with flying saucers and other things. It just only hurts what we're trying to get done. And it's very, very painful. I've been doing this now for 44 years. And, I take it very, very seriously. For crying out loud, I've changed my whole life. I moved from the Northeast to Dallas so I could be here and deal with people on the case on a daily basis. And I mean it very seriously. I made a promise to President Kennedy at his graveside back in 1965 that I would do everything within my power to try to find the truth. And I've spent my entire adult life trying to find the truth here. And I take it very seriously. If I find out I was wrong about something, I admit it. For instance, the man in the doorway. That's another example of what you were just asked me about. There's a man standing in the doorway of the depository at the exact moment of the shooting. His name is Billy Nolan Lovelady. He was a depository employee. He was about 36, 38 years old. He was older than Oswald, but he looks a lot like Oswald, who was only 24. And because he looks so much like Oswald, people think it's him. Well, there's people in the plaza now with newspapers saying that it's him in the doorway. They know better. It's not him. It's very clearly not him. I interviewed him before he died, and he was standing in the doorway, and it goes on and on and on. Yet, to make it a schmaltzy thing, to try to make it more dramatic, people will say it's him in the doorway, therefore it couldn't have been Oswald firing. Well, Oswald, at the time that picture was taken, was on the second floor, and he was eating his lunch. He can't be in three places. He certainly can't be in two, but he certainly can't be in three. So, again, there's a lot of bad evidence out there, evidence in quotes. And what really, really annoys me is defenders of the Warren Commission referring to, especially in the news media, especially the Dallas print news media, they're the worst. Talk about, these are the facts, the facts, the facts. They're not facts at all. It's what these morons made up in the first place. It wasn't true. They bought into it then, and now they're defending their own mistakes. And they still won't admit the truth. The House Assassinations Committee proved there was a conspiracy for a lot of different reasons. The press will now say the only evidence is the acoustics evidence. That's not true at all. There's a lot of evidence in a lot of areas. Eyewitness testimony, medical evidence, acoustics evidence, ballistics evidence. It all points to conspiracy. But because the House Committee developed and created this acoustics evidence, the other side is now saying that's the only evidence there is. Well, it's not true. But I'm being particularly vocal so that you can pick and choose. I'm giving you more than you need, I hope.
This is perfect. This is great.
Great.
I mean, you know what editing is.
Yeah, of course.
So, speaking of Walt Brown,
We weren't, but okay.
no. I mean, when I was speaking with Walt Brown,
I see.
he said, and one of his lines was, as far as researchers, look for the enemy and we see ourselves, like you were saying, research community is almost its own worst enemy.
Walt Kelly years ago in Pogo, in the comic strip, there's a character named Albert in it, the alligator. He said, "We has met the enemy and they is us." That's true. That's exactly right. In some cases, we are our own worst enemy. But then again, the other side really doesn't need the help. They're bad enough. The issue of the government going after dissenters and Warren Commission critics is not at all hypothetical. It is fact. Mark Lane has gotten a lot of pages declassified through Freedom of Information Act suits about himself. Harold Weisberg, the same situation. We are a target. We are considered terrorists. As a matter of fact, I, as a researcher and a critic of the Warren Report in Dealey Plaza, was actually confronted with Homeland Security and called a terrorist. Homeland Security with machine guns and then those gray suits and all came down to the plaza once, kicked me out of the plaza and told me not to ever come back. Of course, I was back the same day, but they actually came there with machine guns. That's the real terrorism. And that's exactly what's going on. And very real. I've been thrown in jail for what I do. You know, they're real criminals all over the place, killers, rapists. Nothing ever happens to them, but publish a magazine saying that Oswald didn't do it or that there was a conspiracy, and then you're a terrorist. You're the bad guy, and that's what's going on. 1035 960 just simply was their mistake. They released that by mistake in 76, and that was their plan. If the government is not involved in this, why would they have a formal policy to deal with it? And that document proves that they do, in fact, have this policy. In my new book, I'm going to be publishing some new information, a 2.5-page document that basically explains why they're doing it. It's quite heavy. You know, Oswald was not the lone nut that we're presented with. You know, we're told he's a loner. A loner. Well, he had a wife, he had 2 kids, he had lots of friends, he had a job. He wasn't a loner at all. Yeah, we're told he's this dumb loner, that he didn't have any kind of intelligence and he was easily manipulated. Oswald had 140 IQ. He was no dummy. He was taught to speak fluent Russian by the Marine Corps. That's not a dummy. That's an intelligent guy. The whole image that we have of Lee Harvey Oswald has been totally wrong from the very, very beginning. Yet it was fabricated to give us this impression that he was guilty, and in fact he was not. And you know, there are basically 3 different aspects of dealing with this case. Number 1, the Warren Commission was right. They got it right. Oswald is a lone assassin, nobody else involved. That's one extreme. The other extreme is this massive conspiracy, including the government itself, to kill the president, with Oswald involved. There's the third option, and that is that Oswald had absolutely nothing to do with it and was picked as the patsy by the people who were really responsible for this. And that's the real truth. No, Lee Oswald could not possibly. By the way, you asked me before about the name of the fellow who was shot 5 times. It's Henry Marshall. I knew I'd think of it. But Henry Marshall was examining some of Lyndon Johnson's illegal activities with some of his political cronies and business associates. And Henry Marshall couldn't be bought off. He was incorruptible. So they murdered him. And Johnson was up to his ears in it. And I think Bobby Kennedy knew it. It's one of the reasons why the assassination had to happen, to stop Bobby from going after Johnson. J. Edgar Hoover wasn't going to go after his buddy. The only one who was actually doing it was Bobby. That's why he had to be eliminated too. There have been 3 major milestones in the Kennedy assassination through the years. Of course, the first issue involved in the timeline is the assassination itself, November of '63. The very first milestone in the case was...
Is that you?
I don't know. Is it? I guess it is. Yes, it is. I'm sorry. Anyway, okay. In the history of the Kennedy case, there have been 3 major milestones, peaks, if you will, in public interest. The first was the Jim Garrison investigation into Clay Shaw and David Ferry and the others, the actual conspiracy itself. That was the first one, and that really got the case going and raised public interest about the conspiracy. Of course, the press really came down on him. I mean, really, they never investigated it. They never considered that he might be right. They just immediately attacked him. And that was from the very, very beginning. And they made his life a living hell and destroyed the investigation. That was the first peak. The second peak was when I released the film of the assassination on national television, on Good Night America, back in March of 1975. Then the public, for the first time, saw that, in fact, the president had been hit from the front and was thrown to the rear, and that the shooting happened in a way that no one person, not Oswald or anyone else, could have done. The shots are coming way too fast. The president and Governor Connolly were hit at separate times. All the stuff, every lie that the Warren Commission had told was disproven by this Zapruder film. And that's what led to the creation of the House Assassinations Committee, the reinvestigation, and the finding of conspiracy. That was the second one. The third one was Oliver Stone's landmark film, JFK. Uh, this laid the evidence out in a dramatic way for the public to see. The public has always known it was a conspiracy. No one ever really bought into the lie of the Warren Commission. Not any great percentage. And they knew it, but they didn't know why. The big thing with JFK is they didn't have to sit down for a couple of weeks and read a book. They could watch a movie in 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and see what the issues really were and understand what the evidence was that proved that there was a conspiracy. And those were the three peaks in the case. Right now, we need another one. JFK was 1991. That was quite a while ago. It's well over 16 years ago, actually. And in that period of time, a lot of people have, gotten tired of the issue and gone away and forgotten about it. Um, we've gone through a period of time now where for something like 15 or 16 or 17 years now, there are more people alive on Earth born after President Kennedy was killed than were alive when he was alive. And people have forgotten. To many people today, President Kennedy is just a face on a coin that we never spent. People don't understand who he was, what he stood for, why people get passionate about trying to find the truth. The fact that he was killed was the most inexcusable horror in this nation's history, as far as I'm concerned. But the insult added to the injury is this insistence by the news media and politicians and the Sixth Floor Museum to tell us that Oswald acted alone. They're actually defending the guilty parties by laying blame on someone who had nothing to do with it. And that's unforgivable, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, can you tell me what's it 16 years ago plus is the last milestone? Can you tell me what's it gonna take? What's needed?
We have hit a point now where no matter what happens, it may never be enough to reopen the case. The House committee proved that many of the leads went cold. It's just been too long. The passage of time has always been our enemy in this case. We still could have learned more. The House committee had over 100 major leads that needed to be followed up when they ran out of time and money. They no longer existed. Their mandate ran out. But they gave a series of over 100 recommendations to the Department of Justice to follow through. And 9 years later, in 1988, without investigating a single one of those leads, the Department of Justice, that which we laughingly call the Department of Justice, formally closed the case. If you were guilty and you wanted to go to somebody and confess, there's no one to go to. The case doesn't exist anymore. It's closed. There's no one investigating it. And what's bizarre is when you consider this, even if it wasn't the president, there is no statute of limitations on murder. And the case should have been left open forever. Even J. Edgar Hoover said that the case would never be closed, yet they closed it. It's inexcusable, yet that's where we are now. And it's up to people like myself and you and a handful of others to keep the case alive. And I do it. I go down to Dealey Plaza every week and nearly in the summertime every day. And I talk to as many people as are interested in learning about it. And I'll spend every weekend day just talking to them about it, answer any questions that they've got, and try to solve the case that way, one person at a time. And if it takes that, then that's what I'll do.
What's your hope for the future then in the case?
Well, this is something I've said for many, many years, and I think it's as true now as it was when I first said it back in the 1970s, that it may be too late for justice in this case, but it's never too late for the truth. I feel that we owe it to John Kennedy's memory to find the truth as much as we possibly can. You know, he gave his life for what he believed in. And what he believed in was making it a better, safer world for everybody, not just people of privilege. And he came from privilege, yet he ignored all that. He saw everybody as an American, as a citizen, a citizen of the world. And he was worried about the future, he was worried about nuclear warfare and the destruction of the planet and children dying. He cared. He,
Stand by, stand by.
the last thing that happened, you were talking before about being attacked in Dealey Plaza. The last thing that happened was I was working one day, September 12th of 2005, and I was there working, and all of a sudden this big nauseating cloud just came around me. I turned around. There were two guys in yellow hazmat suits spraying this stuff on me, and it turned out to be a neurotoxin called chlorpyrifos. And chlorpyrifos can kill people. In fact, one of the four people who was sprayed did die. He didn't die immediately, but he died very soon thereafter. And I got very sick, really ill, and have been ever since. As were two other people who worked with me down in the plaza, who didn't die but had suffered the effects from this. So I sued the city, and a judge I consider to be quite corrupt threw it out of court. We never had a chance to present the issues, period. So this still goes on, and it lets me know that in fact I'm a danger to the power structure that way, whoever they may be. But I've been thrown in jail for this. I've been ticketed 80 times illegally, pure harassment. Uh, I was attacked by the guy with a knife, once with a guy with a baseball bat, once with a guy with a board. Twice they tried to run me over. And this still goes on. I can show you newspaper articles of when my house was firebombed back in 1983. It is not new. I mean, this is going on a lot. And when you consider how many of the actual assassination witnesses have died, I mean, here we are 44 years later, nearly 45, and over 400 of the witnesses are dead. Yeah, certainly a great many from natural causes, but there's a disproportionately large number that have died from unsolved homicides, uh, cases where there should have been autopsies and there weren't. It goes on and on and on. And the death toll is just rising to this day. It's still rising. Of course, less and less now as time goes by because there's less and less people around. But again, you asked me what I see for the future. It doesn't look particularly bright as far as finding the truth goes. It would take something of a rare creature, an honest politician, to have the courage to do something about this. Well, back when I released the Zapruder film in '75, I gave them the evidence. I gave them the power to do something about it if they wanted to, and fortunately, enough of them did. Nowadays, I'm not sure that the Zapruder film would even help. You know, with this war that's going on in Iraq, with over 4,000 American soldiers dead now, trying to find weapons of mass destruction that never existed in the first place. Uh, it goes on and on. The immorality of what we have to deal with on a daily basis basically buries this and consigns it to history. To me, the issues of the assassination are as current today as they were then. But for most people, we're talking about something that happened nearly a half a century ago, in another century. For kids of today, this is the Lincoln assassination of the last century. It happened so long ago, they have no clue. They don't understand it. I see people come to Dealey Plaza on a daily basis. They'll stand on the X, which I had to put in Dealey Plaza. The city won't do it. The X on the exact spot where the president was killed, I put that there. It's still there. I've had it there now for well over a decade. And people will come, they'll stand on it, they'll smile and wave, and they just don't understand the severity of what actually happened. The history of the world changed at that moment, right on that spot. And everybody's been affected. Anyone who lost a father, son, brother, sister, aunt, whatever in in Vietnam, if they lost
Stand by 1 second.
anyone who lost a relative, friend, whatever, in Vietnam, lost that person because President Kennedy was killed. He was withdrawing from Vietnam. He realized it was a mistake and unwinnable. And the 58,000 American lives that were lost in Vietnam were lost because Lyndon Johnson wanted to make money. And the people that got him into the White House made a fortune on the war and changed history. President Kennedy would have saved those 58,000 lives. So it has affected us. It has been much broader and more sweeping than the death of one man. And I think the news media is aware of that. You know, they'll never talk about it, they'll never admit it, but I'm sure that they know it. It's not surprising that they're looking the other way because it becomes inexcusable just again because of the result. America's foreign policy changed at 12:30 on November 22nd, 1963, and it never went back. Oh, I love to deal with that subject. You know, they don't make any money, they don't get anything out of it. Well, let's see. Is that really true? Is that really true? Gerald Ford, one of the 7 Warren Commission members, became president. Arlen Specter became a senator. On and on and on. They write books, they make a fortune. Defenders of the Warren Commission, Gerald Posner. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars did he make off of his book? Vincent Bugliosi, same thing. Now, these are people that know that Oswald didn't do it, and they're writing books that are grossly dishonest. Yet they're making money, more money than we'll ever do. I spent 44 years doing this. It's cost me my house, my wife, my children. It's cost me everything I had. How do you buy that back for any amount of money? I'm down in Dealey Plaza on a daily basis. The only thing that lets me survive is the sale of the magazines and the DVDs so people can learn about the case. I make it available to them at a very reasonable cost. Um, there are people that, yes, in fact, are presenting lies about the case on both sides and are cleaning up. The other side has made a lot more money than we ever will. If I wanted to write a book now saying Oswald acted alone, I could have no problem having it published by any publisher in this world. It'd be the easiest thing to do. I was offered a job working at the 6th Floor Museum as director for $180,000 a year, as long as I didn't tell the truth, as long as I didn't say Oswald acted alone. I'm sorry, as long as I said was willing to say, let me start that all over again.
Stand by. Okay.
I was offered a job as director of the 6th Floor Museum, $180,000 a year to start, as long as I was willing to say that Oswald acted alone. If I mentioned there was a conspiracy, I would not have the job. And I basically told them where they could put it. This is going back many, many years. And if I'd have thought there was a chance that I could have had an effect to get them to tell the truth on the 6th floor and admit that Oswald was part of a conspiracy, not an active part of a conspiracy, but he'd been dragged into it, I'd have taken the gamble and done it. But they made it very clear to me that I would not be able to. If you go to the 6th Floor Museum bookstore, you're not going to find a single honest book on the assassination, not one admitting the conspiracy. Think it's an accident? Not a chance. That's their policy. Their policy is to back the Warren Commission. Well, even the government, as of 1978, admits the Warren Commission report was wrong. They admit it was wrong. They proved it was wrong. Yet the 6th floor still backs it. It's incredible.
What?
Well, that's their job. You know, that's what they're there for. They pay very, very little money to stay there. They get to stay there as long as they lied to the public. If they told the truth, the city would shut them down in a minute. They know what side their bread is buttered on. I know I was on the board of advisors, you know, when they started this whole thing. And they promised us, all of us, that they would present all sides of the issue equally and fairly, and that they would not take sides. Well, just go up there now. That's the exact opposite of what they're doing now. What they're doing now is totally backing the Warren Commission report, even though the government itself admits it didn't happen. Only the Sixth Floor Museum and the national news media and the local news media here in Dallas uh, will back the official Warren Commission report from back then. But the House Assassinations Committee was the last official word, and they said there was a conspiracy. Now the other side say, oh no, they didn't say there was a conspiracy. They said it was only 95% or greater. Please, 95% or greater? The first peer review of their work raised it to 98% or greater that there was a conspiracy. Well, greater than 98 is 99 or 100. And in fact, it is 100%. It's always been 100%. The medical evidence, the ballistics evidence, the acoustics evidence, the eyewitness testimony is unanimous. Shots came from more than one direction. There was more than one shooter, therefore a conspiracy. Unless you're naive enough to believe that two people, or three people, or four people, or five, or six people were all firing at the same time in the same place on their own. It's ludicrous. That's frustrating. Gary Mack and I, for many, many years, were close friends, very close friends. He was one of my closest friends. And he was one of our more articulate people, explaining, what the minute issues of the case were, proving conspiracy. All you have to do is watch The Men Who Killed Kennedy and see it. And then they offered him $70,000 a year to start. And now you can't get him to admit publicly that there was a conspiracy. He knows there was a conspiracy. He still believes it, but he won't say it. And he appears on TV shows basically backing the other side. And I'm very saddened by that. I really am. I've had people come up to me and say, what's the matter with him? Why did he do this? It's not something that really escaped public observation. They're aware of it. Every time they've seen The Men Who Killed Kennedy, they know this. It saddens me that he sold out, but he did. We still talk. We still basically get along, but I don't know what's going on behind closed doors. I have no idea what's being said behind my back. I know more than once he has raised improperly issues relating to other work that I've done in the past and other issues, and told people not to pay any attention to what I'm saying or doing. My book, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, not The Men Who Killed Kennedy, I'm sorry, that was the documentary. The Killing of a President, the first true photo anthology on the Kennedy case, should still be in print now. He personally made sure that the Sixth Floor Museum bookstore would not carry the book because he disagrees with it. Not because it's true or false or this issue or that issue. He doesn't like it. So he made sure that they didn't carry it. That book would still be in print to this day if, in fact, it hadn't been for that. And now it's not. It's going for $400 a copy on eBay if you can find the darn thing. And I'm very proud of the book. I'd love to be able to republish it. But when they're gone forever. It's not going to be republished or reprinted. And he's the reason why. The Sixth Floor Museum, I'm glad it's there because people want to come to see it. And while they're there, they learn while they're there. And most people that go up there and then come down to the plaza and talk to us, they're horrified by it. They just shake their heads and can't believe how dishonest it is. And I understand the political reason for it. I do. I don't like it, but I understand it. They don't want to be shut down, and they would be shut down if they told the truth. It's that. I was arrested in Dealey Plaza and thrown in jail for simply publishing a magazine disagreeing with the Warren Commission. And the arresting officer apologized to me. He said, listen, I really don't want to do this, but I've been ordered. I'm just following orders. So it was the city manager had ordered, of Dallas, had ordered that I be thrown in jail for this. It was pure harassment. That's real terrorism. because, you know, the ultra-conservative supporters of the Warren Commission had that kind of power. You know, the links between the New York Times and the CIA are just like that, and they go back to the 1960s, maybe earlier than that. Um, you read the Carl Bernstein article in Rolling Stone magazine. Well, that was basically a copy of an article that I had written in Argosy magazine months and months earlier. As a matter of fact, you can go and compare the two of them together, and most of the stuff that I wrote is in Carl Bernstein's article, and it can't be by accident. In any case, um, the New York Times has backed this from the very beginning to the point where they actually published a cheapy version of the Warren Report in paperback, so everybody could read it. And they felt it was their policy, their need, their responsibility to publish the Warren Report and make it more universally available. Why? Why? But they did it. They did it. The Warren Report was backed by CBS TV on the day of its release. They weren't supposed to have it, but they obviously did, because the day it was released, they were in the middle of a 2-hour special dealing with it, item by item. The day it was released, they nobody could read the Warren Report and do 2 hours worth of TV special in half an hour, 45 minutes. Yet there it was. It's a matter of history. Well, you ask yourself why. Well, who ran CBS? Bill Paley. Who was Bill Paley? Well, he was a founding member of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he was a loyalist. He created their policy, and nobody, even the great Walter Cronkite, would ever dare challenge his edict. And his edict was, we're going to back the Warren Commission, and they did. Now, I don't know whether Lyndon Johnson went to these people and said, listen, it's a matter of national security. If we admit the conspiracy, we'll be in World War III. It's a possibility that could have happened. They could have lied to us for what they might have thought was the best of reasons, but they knew they were lying. Absolutely, they knew they were lying. And they know now. The Dallas Morning News knows that every time they do an article attacking us, that they're lying. There's a horrible woman writer for the Dallas Morning News who constantly writes these articles. Well, she wrote one a couple of years ago, just attacking us, the research community, grossly unfairly. Never spoke to us. Never gave us a chance to present our point of view. Just attacked us for being tacky and out there, and like as you said, making a fast buck on the case, which is not the case at all. You know, how do you buy back all those years? You can't. There's no way. Nothing makes it worthwhile unless you find the truth. If you get the truth out there, then it's worthwhile. Um, Now, are we ever going to see a prosecution in the Kennedy case? No, of course not. Most of the people involved in the murder are dead anyway, and you couldn't prove at this point anything against any one particular person. I could prove to you that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't do it, but I can't prove to you that any one person actually did. Even those who have confessed to being involved with it, you can't prove it. If you take their word for it, if you give a lie detector test to those that are still alive, that might help lead in the right direction. But will we ever know the whole truth? I can't see any way that we ever will. I truly can't. And that saddens me, because I think we owe it to the president's memory to try to find the truth. But everyone else seems to have given up. You know, I'm proud of you that you're doing this documentary. It's important. It's very important. The other side will, through CIA funding and government funding, will create X number of other documentaries lying to the public too. Show me one on the other side that will deal with the medical evidence, honestly. You know, they'll show the old Warren Commission drawings, the H.A. Rydberg drawings, which are inaccurate. Rydberg himself has for years screamed about how he was used. They had him draw pictures of the president's body where the wounds were located. They wouldn't let him see the autopsy pictures. They certainly never saw the body. They told him where to put the wounds. They did the same thing with Ida Dox for the House Assassinations Committee. Now, the Ida Dox drawings are not quite as dishonest as the ones for the Warren Commission, but they're bad enough. You know, they show the wounds in the president's back. Well, there were two holes there. They eliminated one completely. They don't even show it. They don't even show it as a drop of blood or anything. When they drew the back of the president's head from a phonied photograph, they put in an entrance wound where there was none in the first place. All it was a piece of dried blood on the actual photograph. They put it in as a hole, which it wasn't. And these are what they presented as drawings within the HSCA report. They never showed the actual pictures. I'm the one who released those. The single bullet theory relies on those drawings. Yet they've got a hole in the back of the president's neck. It's an entrance wound. Well, if you look at the autopsy photographs, there are no holes in the back of his neck. None. It's 7 inches lower. It changes everything. 7 inches sounds like just a little bit. No, it's massive. I mean, the president's head was what, 7.5 inches total, top to bottom, something like that. So it makes the difference as to where the location was, the nature of the wound, whatever. The photographs of the president's head showing the back of his skull show an exit wound, an avulsed exit wound in the rear of his head, with a beveling, an outside beveling on the back of his skull. That means the shot came from the front. Well, they ignore all that. Anyway. Dan Rather was an up-and-coming reporter for CBS here in Dallas at the time of the assassination. He claimed he was just outside of Dealey Plaza waiting for a film drop from one of the press cars, 8 cars behind the president. Photographs that show the area where he says he was standing show that he was not. He wasn't there. He ran back to CBS and gave his initial reports and whatever. On Sunday morning, he was the one who was bidding on the Zapruder film for CBS TV. And he was at Abraham Zapruder's house. And of course, Life magazine bid $150,000 plus percentage of the royalties, et cetera, et cetera. All Dan Rather was allowed to bid was a total of $10,000. And he was out of the bidding right at the very, very beginning. But he had seen the film in Zapruder's living room. So he ran, as soon as he was out of the bidding, he ran back to CBS, out of breath, just sweating and just, and he gets on national television and tells people he has just seen the film of the assassination. And as the president was hit, he's thrown violently forward. Now, no matter where the shot came from, there's absolutely no question the president was not thrown forward. He was thrown violently to the rear. But it's quite clear what was going on. They were trying to make it sound as if the shot came from behind and pushed the president forward. And it didn't happen. And he knew it didn't happen. But he got on TV and lied to the American public. And for years refused to correct it. Just let it go. In his book, The Camera Never Blinks, he said he made an honest mistake. Well, he made a mistake, but there's nothing honest about it. I don't like what happened to him on this, the way he was set up with this George Bush document thing. But the fact that the document he was given, being a fake, doesn't mean that the issues weren't legitimate. They probably were. But by setting him up, they did something very convincingly, and he fell for it, and that's how they got rid of him. What he should have been gotten rid of for was what he had done with the Kennedy case years and years earlier. He built his whole career, became the CBS News anchor, all because he was Mr. Reliable and did exactly what Lyndon Johnson and the rest of the government wanted. They didn't want you and I and the rest of the American people and the world to know that there was a conspiracy. And they themselves created what could have been a totally separate conspiracy to cover it up. There's no reason to believe that, or there's no reason why we have to believe that the conspiracy to kill the president and the conspiracy to cover it up are the same one. Given the paper trail and the evidence left behind by the conspirators who killed the president, they could easily get people that are loyalists to the official fiction to cover it up and go into it for what they think is honest reasons, matter of national security. Can't you simply imagine Lyndon Johnson going to Warren Commission members and saying, look, guys, we know that you're really basically essentially honest people and like that, but if we tell the truth about this conspiracy that Fidel Castro and Nikita Khrushchev were behind the assassination, it'll lead us into World War III. We got to cover this up. We got to bury it. Well, those weren't the real issues in the first place, but by convincing these people that they were legitimate issues, you could see them getting involved in preventing nuclear war. And once they're in it, once they've done it, they can't go back. They don't necessarily have to be evil people. One must also remember that two of the Warren Commission members refused to sign the report as originally written. They refused to say that Oswald acted alone, and they never did sign that. It was rewritten to state that based on the evidence shown to them, they could find no proof of conspiracy, but that didn't mean that there wasn't one. That's what it really says, but that's not what CBS and the others will tell us. They'll lie to us and say that the Warren Commission said Oswald was guilty alone. They never said that. The House Assassinations Committee were very kind to the Warren Commission people. It simply said they were incompetent and that they were wrong. They never said that the Warren Commission actively and on purpose covered that up, but they in fact did. Gerald Ford became president by selling this incredible lie to the American public that the single bullet theory was legitimate. Well, in fact, the single bullet theory is really the single bullshit theory. It's an absolute lie. Nobody with any common sense could believe it. The timing is wrong, the angles are wrong, everything about it is wrong. Yet the entire Warren Commission theory of one person firing all the shots relies entirely upon it because there were too many shots fired. Do you know to this day the FBI still does not believe the Warren report? They formally disagree with the Warren report. The FBI. You know, their theory is the president was hit first, Governor Connolly was hit second, and the president was hit again by himself. And they ignore the fact that James Tague down by the underpass was hit by a separate bullet. They ignore it completely. The Warren Commission couldn't ignore James Tague. But if you allow him being hit, then you have too many bullets being fired to have done the act. That's why they created the single bullet theory. And all it is a theory. It's not a fact. It never was. There was something I wanted to add to something you asked me before. Are we running? Okay. You mentioned before about the two bestsellers in the case backing the Warren Commission fiction. They were very, very happily reviewed by New York Times. My book hit number one on my book High Treason hit number one on their list, on their bestseller list. It was on the list for 6 months and was in the top 10 for I think 11 weeks. They never listed it as being above number two, but they did show it number two. And here's a book on the assassination, on the most important event of the mid 20th century, and they never reviewed the book. Never reviewed the book, ever. They did hire somebody to review it, and they told him to slam the book. That's the word they used. The editorial people told him to slam the book. He read the book, said he couldn't slam it, so they never ran a review, period. Isn't that amazing? And it was the New York Times that ran that totally illegal and dishonest ad for Gerald Posner's book, using my name and 5 other people to advertise his book. That's illegal. It's absolutely illegal. And they knew it was illegal, but they did it anyway and got away with it. They used my picture and my name, and the ad said, guilty. Big words, guilty. Picture of Mark Lane, Jim Mars, Oliver Stone, myself, and others. And then big words, guilty, and then underneath, misleading the American people. and it was an ad for Posner's book. Now, it's illegal, but they got away with it. First time in history anyone had ever gotten away with that. It was misappropriation of image and name and likeness. There's no question about the fact that they did it. They didn't have a release, yet there it was. Unfortunately, we had a very dishonest judge in the case who was a big fan of Earl Warren and let him get away with it.
What does that mean? What's the meaning of that?
Of what?
Greater.
Oh, just simply that the New York Times and Random House and all didn't care about the truth, didn't care about law, whatever. They were just going to just besmirch us, the researchers in the case, for their own personal gain. I mean, that book became number one on the New York Times bestseller list too. And it became one, and they, of course, gave it glowing reviews, as did every media stooge within the print and news media, the actual television media. And it's an awful book. It's grossly dishonest, horribly dishonest. And I mean, where do you begin when dealing with Posner's book? He claims he did these interviews. Well, so many of those people have said, no, he never interviewed us. We never made those statements. We don't know who he is. If they're in the interviews, they're all quoted within the book. Documents. He says that these documents say one thing. If you actually can find the documents, which he didn't publish, if you find the actual documents, you find they say the exact opposite. He has diagrams of Oswald leaving the window, the sniper's nest window, and walking unobstructed straight across diagonally on the 6th floor. What about the thousands, literally thousands of cartons of books that were blocking the way? He couldn't have done it. It was physically impossible. But he shows the 6th floor being totally empty. And he got away with all this crap. And of course, he was the media darling, because he's the one who said, you guys didn't screw up in your reporting. You did a good job. He kissed their butt and they kissed his.
See him still?
Yeah. You know, that pimpy curly Q in the middle of his forehead, never blinking, looking at the camera and just lying about whatever issue happens to come up. He's their expert on everything.
Jump around a little bit. They say one of the devil's advocate again. Someone would have talked. There'd been a conspiracy by now. 45 years later, someone would have talked.
We have heard from the defenders of the Warren Commission through the years that if in fact there had been a conspiracy, someone would have talked. Well, a lot of people have talked. A lot of people have come forward and said they were involved in this or they knew something about this. Press won't report that, but there are a lot of people that have. But by the same token, on the other side of that same coin, we're talking about the murder of the head of state. We're talking about a crime where there is no statute of limitations. And the only way people would actually know from the inside is that they were involved in it. And they're not going to put their head in the noose, not unless they're terminal or something like that. I mean, people like Santos Trafficante on his deathbed admitted involvement in this. We didn't hear about it officially. We heard about it otherwise. Eventually, it was confirmed that he did, in fact, say it. We know Jimmy Hoffa was involved in this. We know that he had written a letter, or sent not written a letter. He had sent an attorney to discuss with mob leaders about rubbing out the Kennedys, and he wanted it done. He hated them. There's no question about that. But there's a lot that we know. You know, somebody would have talked. A lot of people have talked. You know, is it all true? I mean, Charles Harrelson, when he was arrested, he admitted being involved in this and offered to turn state's evidence. Well, nobody wanted to find out what he had to say, so they refused to make a deal with him. So he just backed off of his confession. James Files is in jail right now for attempting to murder two Illinois policemen. He confessed to being involved in this. There's videotapes, there's books, this whole thing all about him. You know, is he telling the truth or not? Who knows? Maybe he is. I think he is. Why do I think so? Because the press ignores them. Because the FBI ignores them. because all the investigative agencies ignore him. If they didn't know that he was telling the truth, they would be more than happy to investigate and prove it's not true and show, hey, these people that back him, they're crazy and they're all nuts. There was no conspiracy. The fact that they ignore him completely when he's there telling a rather credible story makes me wonder. That's the main reason why I do believe this story. You know, you know, if somebody says that someone would have talked and no one has, they're lying. Just plain lying, or they're stupid. They don't know. People tend to believe the Warren Commission story because they don't know what it is. They're not exposed to what the real evidence is. I interviewed more than 20 of the Dallas doctors, nurses, Dealey Plaza eyewitnesses, people that had not been interviewed before. I worked for the House Assassinations Committee. It gave me a way in to talk to these people. Most of them are dead now. Very few of them are still alive. On my DVDs are the actual interviews or sections of those interviews with these important witnesses. But unless you got a chance to see the DVD, you wouldn't know that those interviews even existed. The major networks, the TV stations, even cable, refuse to run those sort of things. They won't deal with them. So the public is not exposed to the fact that this evidence exists. A great, fabulous witness in this case, a fellow named Robert Knudsen, Knudsen. And Robert Knudsen was one of the autopsy photographers for President Kennedy's autopsy. He was not called to the Warren Commission. He was called to the House Assassinations Committee, and they buried his testimony. They never even listed anywhere that they even spoke to him. The Assassination Records Review Board in the 1990s, the mid-1990s, found out about the fact that he had been questioned by the HSCA and published some of the recollections about this from his wife and kids. Mr. Knudsen was an incredibly important witness. He saw many of the autopsy photographs which have now disappeared from the National Archives. Ones that showed probes in the president's back, the open chest photographs, the internal chest photographs. All of these things which were so incredibly important that are no longer there, which the House Committee never even got to see. And we wouldn't even know that those things had existed if it hadn't been for Mr. Knudsen. Does the public know about it? No. Haven't a clue that he even existed. Floyd Reeby, one of the autopsy photographers, took rolls and rolls of 35 millimeter color slides, or slides are actually negatives. I'm not sure whether those slides are negatives. I'd have to check my notes. I interviewed him. Not one of his pictures has ever surfaced. Not one. They're all gone. Officially, there are 152 pictures taken. There's something like 15 or 16 of them left. That's it. They're gone from the National Archives. How does that happen? How does the archives lose anything? They have more security than any other organization I've ever seen. It's inconceivable that it could not have happened as an official policy to make this happen. The president's brain is missing from the archives; it's gone. Microscopic slides prepared from the tissue samples at the edges of the wounds, the margins of the wounds, they're gone. The skull fragments are gone. It's all gone. How do they lose all this stuff, and why? No. Because it proved conspiracy. That's why. When the House Assassinations Committee spent 2 years, 2 solid years, plus 6 months earlier and 6 months after, in fact, they were actually doing this for 3 years. In all that period of time, why did they not exhume the president's body? The best evidence that there was. Why didn't they look and see? Don't have an answer for it. The director, the acting director for a short period of time of the HSCA, the House Assassinations Committee, Robert Tannenbaum, fabulous witness in this case. He didn't see the president's body. He was not there at the hospital when the president was brought in, but he ran this investigation. And he called me into his office one morning and told me that I had been right, that this conspiracy existed and went to the highest level of government. That's a direct quote. Well, what's the highest level of government? The presidency. Lyndon Johnson. And he told me that's where it went. He said, we're going to blow this out of the water. A few weeks later, he was out of a job. But he, thank goodness. I mean, here's a man who got this job, although admittedly temporarily by his own choice. He replaced Richard Sprague, and he didn't want to do that because Richard Sprague had been a very close friend. Eventually, it became Robert Blakey, who became the director of the HSCA, and unfortunately, that's where it all went downhill. But for Richard Sprague, who wanted to deal with this as an unsolved homicide, as any other, and start from scratch, of course, they got rid of him real early on, and then Bob Tannenbaum was doing the same thing, going the same direction, so they got rid of him, and who was left? Well, Blakey, who went along with the official fiction as long as he could. And finally, when we got to the acoustics evidence and they couldn't avoid it anymore, then he finally admitted a limited conspiracy. Well, conspiracy is a conspiracy. A limited conspiracy is like being slightly pregnant. And we hear in the news, we hear on these documentaries that was only 95% certain. Huh? Only 95% certain there was a conspiracy? It's enough for me. I'll take 50%. I'll take 55%. 95% or greater? And now 98% or greater? There's no question about it. The acoustics evidence was so exacting. There were actually 4 scientists working on the acoustics evidence. Well, 3 scientists and a lay person. I was the lay person. I was really a scientist, but I worked on it with them. James Barger, Mark Weiss, Ernest Ashkenazi, and myself. We did the majority of the work on the acoustics evidence. My job was synchronizing the acoustics tape with the Zapruder film and doing an analysis of that. And we all knew that the fatal shot came from the front. There was no question about that. It came from the front. Struck the president in the right temporal area, threw him to the rear and to the left. There's no question. We all knew it, and the actual committee members, the congressmen, knew it too. But Professor Blakey gagged me, wouldn't let me speak out about this. And I'm sitting there in the room showing this sound version of the Zapruder film to the congressmen. And they're all saying what I knew to be true, and I couldn't confirm it. I couldn't tell them that they were right, because Blakey said I'd be thrown in jail if I did. I was gagged. No, they knew it. They all knew it. But Blakey fought against it, saying, no, the shot was fired from the front, but it missed. Bull. It didn't miss. It hit. And that's the one that killed the president. When my new book comes out, I'm going to prove that. Absolutely prove it. And a blind man will be able to tell, will be able to see that it's true. Huh?
Even if it missed, there was another shot from the front. I mean,
That's the whole point. That's exactly the whole point. What Blakey was saying, was that because the guy who fired from the front missed, it doesn't matter. The fact that he missed means he didn't kill the president. Well, he didn't miss. But even if he had missed, he still tried to kill the president. He existed, and he was there. The witnesses weren't crazy. But the big thing was, if you take the medical evidence, the Parkland witnesses, and you take the acoustics evidence and the eyewitness testimony and put them all together, the picture becomes crystal clear because it all matches exactly right. The Zapruder film shows 2 shots 1.6 seconds apart. The acoustics tape has 2 shots 1.6 seconds apart. Coincidence? Not a chance. It also has two shots from two separate directions, 0.7 seconds apart. 0.7, that's between half and 3/4 of a second, of a single second. The gun can't fire fast enough. It's impossible. An automatic weapon, you'd still have to reacquire the target in your sights. That would take more than 0.7 seconds, even if they hadn't come from separate directions. The acoustics evidence proved the conspiracy, and it's as valid today as it ever was. And that's what scares them. That's why they have to keep attacking it. Because sooner or later, if there is ever another investigation, if they ever go through all of this again and deal with the evidence in an honest way, they're going to have themselves a real problem, because we can go beyond what the HSCA did. The House Committee only did a finite investigation of that one shot. They ignored all the others, all the ones from behind. Look, I told you before, I was one of the scientists, if you call me that, a scientist. I was one of the 4 people that really worked on the acoustics evidence. We had this tape with 10 shot impulses on it. 10. They just kept raising the filters, raising, so they got it down to 4. They threw away legitimate shots, and one of them had a greater degree of probability of being accurate than some of the ones that they did allow. And the reason why they threw it out and didn't deal with it is because it was fired way too soon to have come from that weapon, and it was fired from behind. So they threw out stuff that made it more difficult for them to hide, and they just kept raising the filters. I'm trying to give a good analogy for this, and I'm missing it. Say you want to filter a liquid for some whatever reason, and you put it through a filter or gauze or whatever, and stuff is still getting through. You just make it finer and finer and finer, or thickening up the filtering process until you eliminate a lot of extra stuff. Well, that's exactly what they did. They threw away legitimate shots that did in fact exist and that they knew existed, but it was just too improbable. Somebody, I won't mention who, years and years ago, back in the 1940s, said the larger the lie, the more people will believe it. Now, if there were 10 shots and they admitted 7, people could understand. Yeah, well, 7, 10, maybe, But to say there were only 3 versus 10, was so great that it couldn't possibly have been that many. Yeah, there were. At least 4 shots missed and hit in the plaza. 1 hit inside the president's car, maybe 2 hit the chrome over the windshield, perhaps the windshield itself. 1 hit the north sidewalk of Elm Street. 1 hit the south curb of Main Street. 1 hit in the street at the end of the south sidewalk on Elm Street, and 1 struck by the manhole cover on the south curb of Elm Street. Those are all shots. So you may disagree with 1 or 2, and you can't ignore them all. James Tate was hit during the shooting, for crying out loud. There's no question about that. Of course, the FBI ignores it, but in fact, it did happen. You can see pictures of him with a cut on his cheek. And the police in the plaza were the ones who discovered it. He knew it, he felt it, but a police officer came up to him and said, "Your face is bleeding. You know that?" He said, "Yeah, it happened during the shooting." Well, they examined the area and they found the spot on the curbing where the bullet actually struck, 15 feet from his feet. Just flew up all over the place. So the physical evidence of more shots has always been there. Always been there. I don't know how they got away with limiting it to just 4 shots. But once they had that, they had the conspiracy, and it allowed them to remain relatively conservative and still admit the conspiracy. So that's where they left it. What needed to be done, and what they easily could have done, is 2 things. Number 1, they could have gone back and checked further for the source of those first 2 shots from behind, which were 1.6 seconds apart. If they'd have done that, they'd have found that they were fired from separate positions, that there was at least a third shooter, not just the two. The fourth shot could have been fired from the same spot as either the first or the second. We're talking about the ones that they confirmed. There were more than that. But of the four they confirmed, the first, second, and fourth shots all came from behind. Now, those first two shots could not have come from the same weapon, but the fourth one could have been from the same as either of the other two. I wrote a list for the House committee when I found out they were going to be doing this testing, and I listed 21 suspected firing points. Not saying that there were 21 shooters, but these were legitimate potential shots that could have been fired. And I pleaded with them to actually test all of the shots to at least eliminate some of them from consideration, because they were checking the echo patterns, the acoustics fingerprint of the shots. They only fired from the sixth floor window and the knoll. That's all they fired. They never tested any of the other 19 suspected firing points. If they had done so, they would have had a greater degree of match on some of those other 6 shots that were on the tape. The reason why they were eliminated was they didn't have an echo pattern match. The reason why is because they never fired from those firing points. That's the simplest way to try to deal with that. They could have gone much further, and they still could, but they won't. The creation of the Assassination Records Review Board was a direct result of what was found with the HSCA and Oliver Stone's suggestions of the movie JFK. I testified in front of them, I think 7 days total. Maybe it was just 5. It was back in 1994, 1995. And I testified again and again and again. They really raked me over the coals. You know, I was a friendly witness, and yet I was being treated like a criminal. You know, much of what they learned from the acoustics and photographic evidence they got from me. But many of the wannabes in the case had told them nasty things about me, that, you know, I stole stuff from the National Archives, even though the stuff was still there. It wasn't even missing, but they told them I had stolen stuff, which wasn't true. And they all knew it wasn't true. And I was vindicated that the leadership of the review board said that I had stolen nothing. You know, these are people like David Lifton and people like that. A couple of nuts. There was a screwy guy named Steve Barber, the nutty character, the rock drummer who claims to have heard other things on the tapes that nobody else had heard, and on and on and on. And they apparently, well, somebody said they all wanted to be me. They all wanted to be the guy who had done this work, or they wanted to belittle the work that I had done that had gotten it so far, for jealousy or whatever other reason. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it makes sense when you look at it. In any case, so they treated me as a hostile, negative witness. And I gave them a lot of good stuff. And one of the things I found that they were doing is that they were ignoring the testimony of some of the autopsy witnesses, like Floyd Reeby and others. And I asked them about that one day when we were walking out to lunch between, I guess it was like the 5th or 6th day that I was actually testifying in front of them. And I asked them if they were going to talk with him. He said, no, now's the time to be closing doors, not opening them. And I said, but this guy was there. He took pictures. And they poo-pooed it. They just threw the whole thing away. They did so many people that they could have spoken to. They didn't. But I didn't know that they had spoken to people relating to Robert Knudsen. And I didn't know that Knudsen had even existed yet. I didn't find that out until the AARB report came out. And they actually revealed that Knudsen had seen and dealt with and described photographs that were no longer in the collection, that should still have been in the National Archives, that weren't. And they asked me specifically about those photographs. And I, of course, never saw them because the House Assassinations Committee had never seen them. Your computer is blinking, is it? It's,
This is sleep.
oh, okay.
It's just sleep.
Okay. I didn't want your battery to die on you there.
That's alright. If it dies, bring it back to life.
Okay.
Sorry, man.
You-
We get closer up now. Glad I can do this all night. Um, so in the documents themselves, can you tell me what is in the documents? Well, how many documents were released and what was in them?
How many documents were released by the AARB?
Yes.
No clue. The Assassination Records Review Board released millions of pages of documents. I have not seen them all. I'm not familiar with everything that was there. Much of what was there that related to me dealt with photographic evidence and acoustics evidence, medical evidence. These are the things I've always been most concerned with. They're the strongest evidence as far as I can see. And they released a lot of stuff, a lot of things that related to that. A lot of pages were still redacted, where they have the black magic marker over the actual words, and they call it releasing the document, but of course they really aren't released at all. You have a piece of paper that has a heading and typed from some government agency on top and a date, and at the bottom maybe a signature, and everything is blocked out and there's no information on it at all. That's not releasing the documents. The Warren Commission said it was, but that's a bull story again. The government has been doing this for years and years. And now what's really interesting is that a lot of those pages are being reclassified and locked up again. And people who actually have the documents, even though they got them legally, are now in jeopardy of treason, of being called guilty of treason for possessing stuff that the government released in the first place. The Bush administration started doing this quietly years ago. Stuff that was actually released officially under the Freedom of Information Act and under the Presidential Papers Act and things like that. All of those things are now being resealed again. Bush has sealed up his father's papers, which were supposed to be released, covering up for him. We're going to learn a lot of stuff we can learn about drug smuggling and CIA activities and like that. We'll never know now because he's protecting his father's rear end. This is unimaginably bad and dishonest. Yet he gets away with it, and nobody challenges it. Everyone's afraid to. Why? Because 9/11 put us in this horrible situation with security problems. Well, it's easy to blame everything on 9/11. Uh, that's a great excuse to take away individual freedoms and liberties. But, we're powerless apparently to do anything about that. I got a lot of stuff declassified from the National Archives, and that stuff's reclassified again. The fact that I still have those papers, what does that mean? Does that mean that guilty of something? Well, I got them from them legally. Other people now can't get them. If I publish them, does that make me a bad guy? Does that make me a traitor in any way? No, of course not. But they could say it.
How has the reclassification of documents affected the research community?
Most people aren't even aware that it's happened, but basically it makes it that much more difficult. There's stuff that I found in the National Archives as early as the 1990s, which is now reclassified and missing. It's not there anymore. And that worries me because basically it's like the memory hole in 1984. Anything that disagrees with the official stance of Big Brother is just eliminated until it no longer exists. Now, how do you prove it if it's not there? It's incredible. There was a 2.5-page document in the National Archives in the 1970s that released Oswald working for the CIA. People have seen it. People have written about it. I have it. Other people do too. But when I tried to get a fresher, earlier copy from the archives, now it's not there anymore. It's gone. They claim they never had it, but they did. Several people have seen it. So, that's how it's affected us. I found stuff in the National Archives that I created for the Assassinations Committee, for the HSCA. Um, Stuff relating to Oswald, photographic evidence, and testing that I had done. Well, I found it in the National Archives, misfiled. I mean, totally nothing even close to where it should have been, and quite by accident, looking for other things. And there, there they were, and I was able to get copies of them, because they weren't classified. You couldn't find them. Other photographs taken by some photographers were actually filed under the work of other photographers. Wrongly so. They weren't there. They weren't the same photographer. It wasn't even the same type of film, but they were in the wrong folders, the wrong boxes. Yet, if you didn't know, you'd never know the difference. Fortunately, I knew. So this is the sort of thing. This is why it's so difficult for us to deal with this. Back in the day, they would show you the rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano. They would show you the CE-399, the magic bullet, the clothing, stuff like that. You can't see it anymore. You can't see it at all. They show you photographs of them, but you can't see the actual exhibits. A good example is the piece of the curbing that James Tague hit was. I've requested now a good half dozen times to see the actual cement itself. They won't show it to me. I mean, and I worked for the House Assassinations Committee, for crying out loud. I worked for them for their full lifetime, for all those years. I had security clearance from the FBI, the CIA, the HSCA, all of them. Yet they won't show me this very important evidence, and it's stuff that's really relevant to my work on the case. So, the cover-up still goes on.
Is there anything you'd like to say that I haven't asked you about?
Goodness. No, you've covered quite a bit. I'd like to see the truth come out before I die. I would like to know. There's an old joke, and the joke has 3 punchlines. And the joke is this: an assassination researcher dies, goes to heaven, gets to the pearly gates. There's St. Peter. And St. Peter says, "We know you're an investigator in the Kennedy case. Before you go in, you can ask any question you want, and we'll answer it honestly. But once you go inside, you've just got to accept heaven and just, enjoy the rest of eternity." He says, "Well, do you have a question?" He says, "Yes, I have one question. Who really killed President Kennedy?" And St. Peter says, "I have a theory about that." That's the first answer. The second one is, he says, Lee Harvey Oswald, alone and unassisted. And the researcher looks at him right in the eye and says, "Who do you think you are, Gerald Posner?" And the third answer is, "Who do you think killed who killed President Kennedy?" He says, "Lee Harvey Oswald, alone and unassisted." And the assassination researcher shakes his head. "This conspiracy is wider than I ever believed." Will we ever know the whole truth? Probably not. We know much more than they ever wanted us to know. And I like to think that I'm part of the reason why. I'm very proud of that. It's given my life an extra bit of meaning. And I'm very, very happy to say that because I released the Zapruder film and the autopsy photographs and the photographic evidence through the years, we as a research community do know more. A lot of other people have tried to take credit for my work, and they can't stop that. But the trade-off has been giving up parts of my own personal life, which was my decision. I can't blame anyone for that. I'm hoping that this documentary will make a difference. And every time something as rare as they are gets done and gets done well, it contributes to what we've got and helps preserve, even this many years later, the actual physical evidence. I have very little hope that we'll ever know all the answers. But although, as I said before, it may be too late for justice in this case, it's never too late for the truth. The Zapruder film itself is actually missing a total of 6 frames, and 4 other frames have been damaged. How did it happen? Well, Life magazine bought the film 2 days after the assassination, and they claim they put it in the hands of a junior lab technician who inadvertently cut the film in 2 spots back in the 150s and between frame 207 and 212. 2 frames missing at the first splice, 4 missing at the second splice. Well, in fact, they're no longer missing. I actually published them. I had a copy of the film that was made before the film was actually cut. And it had all the frames, and I have published them in my magazine, and they will be in the new book as well, larger and in better condition than ever before. And the reason for the splices, the reason why they're there, it really relates to the first of the 2 splices more than the second. And that first splice shows the president turning his head 90 degrees, almost instantaneously, at the time the first shot was fired. And that shot was fired before someone in the so-called Oswald window could have seen him. It happened way earlier on. He turns his head, he's looking to his left, and he turns and immediately looks to his right, directly toward the grassy knoll, and stops waving. That's why the frames are missing. And now I've published them, and you can see for yourself that that's what went on.
And then there's a backside, because it was regulated film, so it's split down the middle. Is there any bleed over from?
Well, there's the
No.
images by the sprocket holes that have been.
Yeah, but the sprocket holes are on the outside of the film, the inside of the film.
Yeah, there's at frame around 157, and again at frame 2. Well, let's say at frame 210, because 210 is the major frame of the second splice. Frame 210 is the first spot the FBI established a shot could have been fired from the 6th floor window, because there was a live oak tree blocking the view to the president from that window. Frame 210 is dead center in the middle of the second splice. From frame 207 to 212, where the overlap occurs, where those 4 frames have been removed, you can see the overlap splice. It's very, very apparent. It's a very obvious, sloppy splice. The first one, the important one, the one that happened around frame 157, where the president turns his head, is very well disguised. I'm the one who actually found that, and I found it when I worked with the original film, because I was working with it and I was advancing it in my hand, and I felt the physical splice. And I got an optical loop, and I looked, and I could see there actually was a splice there that to this very day Life magazine denies is there, but it's there, and it was accounted for. And when the Warren Commission counted the frames and numbered them, the FBI all numbered the frames. All the frames were accounted for. They knew how many frames were missing, and they numbered them correctly. The ones that are in the National Archives now are incorrectly numbered. The numbers go off first by 1 and then some more. Frame 413 is named is number 411 or something like that. It's misnumbered because there were some missing from the set, and they didn't realize it. But there are specific artifacts on specific frames that stick out. And I actually took a copy of the original film, and I had a 35 millimeter copy, and I scribed in numbers for every single frame, so I know which is which. I know how many were missing in those 2 splice areas. And then I've got the Secret Service copy, which is intact, which is not missing any frames at all. So you can compare the 2 side by side. That's another reason for why we know that the Zapruder film is in fact legitimate. That's not a fake, because these copies were made the afternoon of the assassination. And there were some others, one of the laboratories that worked on the film swore out affidavits, Jameson I guess it was, that they had made no additional copies. They were lying. There were. I've seen at least 2 of them that were made before the film was sold to Life magazine. So, the affidavits they signed meant nothing, except that the people who signed the affidavits were perhaps not aware that the additional copies existed. But I know they did because I've seen them. CBS actually had one. And the way I know it is the fact that it was not missing the frames in the splice area. That could only have happened before Life magazine bought it. Does that answer the question?
Wow, yeah.
Okay.
That's amazing. You know, it's just amazing. And that's a beautiful part of film. Celluloid film.
I love it.
It's a tangible thing.
I love it. I love film. There's something to it. I used to, when I was working in the film industry, I used to work with three-strip Technicolor. I mean, just the history of all this stuff is so phenomenal. Uh, it's amazing to me. I love film history. I really do. And it's funny, somebody, Guy Marshall, who you may have met, maybe not. He wasn't working with me when last time we spoke. Um, you'll meet him in the plaza. Bless you. He calls me Forrest Gump of the Kennedy case because I seem to have been everywhere for all of this. The autopsy materials, the Zapruder film, the next film, the Muchmore film, photographic evidence, testifying before Congress, working with Oliver Stone. It's like I've been everywhere for all these major events in the case. And it's kind of funny because I actually worked on the movie Forrest Gump. Anyway,
You did it?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah. I'm in the credits for the not the Zapruder film, but the motorcade footage that we used in the movie. That all came from my archive, from my collection. I worked on 4 movies: Executive Action, JFK, um, Ruby, the so-called biopic of Jack Ruby, which is so in error in so many ways, and then Forrest Gump. It was the last one. The original Zapruder was Kodachrome 2.
It was.
Yeah, it was Kodachrome 2, and it was regular 8, as you pointed out. Apparently, every film taken in Dealey Plaza was, in fact, 8mm regular 8.
Right.
Super 8 was just experimental at the time.
Right.
Beverly Oliver's film has disappeared, but she thinks that hers may have been Super 8 because it was an experimental camera that a friend had given her, and she remembers it was cartridge load. So it could very well have been one of the earliest Super 8 films. But since the FBI confiscated it from her, she's never seen it, so we don't know.
What was Gordon? Is it Gordon Arthur?
Gordon Arnold.
Arnold.
Gordon's would have been 8mm also. The question is, what kind was it? Gary Mack is the reason why we don't know. I had a legitimate question I really wanted to know because of some of the legends that were growing around that. I wanted to ask Gordon whether it was regular or Super 8. Gary Mack would not tell me where he was. He held his location secret until after he died. So we have no way of knowing what kind of film it was. He claimed it was a cartridge load. Now, it was a rarity, but there were some cartridge load regular 8 cameras. Not many, but now we'll never know.
Well, it was his mom's camera, right?
Mhm.
Was she ever asked him what kind of camera?
I think she was already dead. I don't know. I've never been able to find out, and Gary Mack is the reason why. I think it's absolutely unforgivable. He was keeping him as his personal witness. Just like David Lifton has done that a lot too. The medical people held their location, where they lived, secret, so nobody but him could talk to them.
Well, that's a common theme, it seems, in this, among a lot of researchers. And they're split pattern. Most are just open information.
That's one of the sad things about this. I used to think, years and years ago, Harold Weisberg and Mark Lane, and all the different research, the community was just so splintered. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if everybody could just get together and work together? And then I started dealing with some of these people myself and realized how really unscrupulous a lot of them were, stealing other people's work and calling it their own, and then attacking the original people for the work that they had done on their own. And I realized years and years ago the reason why the other side's gotten away with this is because we are not solidified as a specific organization, if you will. There are good guys and bad guys on both sides. Uh, More good guys than our side. But Walt Brown, you mentioned, he's a good guy. Josiah Thompson's a good guy. Mark Lane usually is a good guy. Uh, Harold Weisberg was a good guy. Grumpy, couldn't get along with anybody. But essentially a good guy as a researcher goes. Um, Penn Jones, Sylvia Marr, a lot of the good ones, and you get the bad guys too.
John. John. Judge.
John's a good guy. John's a very good guy, but a lot of people don't like him. It's a matter of personality. He and I get along great. I think he's a great guy. He's kept COPA going single-handedly through these years. Um, it's because of him that I got the Sylvia Moore Lifetime Achievement Award, which I'm very, very proud of. Um, and, I always volunteer, always try to help, you know, year after year after year at the conferences. For years, I videotaped it for him for free and just gave him the tapes. And, you know, I paid for the tapes. That was my contribution for it. Cyril Wecht is a great guy. Uh, uh, Jerry Polikoff. Uh,
The list is long.
the list is long, but there's bad guys too. Lifton, Livingstone, just horrible, horrible people. Not even human, just horrible, nasty, thieving people. Um, there's a good guy, Jack White, is a super nice guy. Love him, great guy, super given the salt of the earth. But he's been so wrong about so much in the last couple of years. I put my head in my hands. It hurts me that he's been so wrong about this. Um, what's his name? The PhD from Iowa. My mind's a blank. But he's published a lot of garbage. I mean, terrible. He means well, I think, but he's published a lot of crap. He wrote Assassination Science, or compiled it. It's just a lot of bad stuff that we have to deal with. Fetzer, yeah, James Fetzer. Um, yeah, history may or may not sort out who the good guys and who the bad guys are. I don't know. I'd like to think that it would all be known, but we really have no way of knowing whether it ever will be known. Seriously. Um, I know that I've done everything I can to try to keep the record as straight as it can be. But I mean, Gary Mack, all the years he was a good guy. Now he's a creep and sold out to the other side. And how do you deal with that? He was a good guy. He isn't anymore. Where do you draw the line? Do you put him in this column or that column, or you just ignore him, or pretend he doesn't exist? I was gonna do a chapter in the new book called "The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly," and just name who the good guys were, who the bad guys were, who's done what. And I realized that you can't really deal with it that way. Uh, David Lifton is a prick. He's an absolute thief. He's terrible. He owes me a fortune. He has stolen my work, claimed it as his own again and again and again. Um, Nasty, nasty guy. Yet, Best Evidence, his book, opened up a lot of people's eyes. Half the book isn't true. The other half is. They don't know. The public doesn't know the difference between what's good and what isn't. But a lot of the stuff, a lot of the interviews with the medical people are very important. So where do you draw the line with somebody like that? You have Harrison Livingstone, who is an absolute prick, who's done absolutely nothing for the case, and in fact hurt it very, very severely, and hurt me personally very severely. Um, there's nothing good to say about him at all, except that he published my second book, High Treason, and he put his name down as as an author of the book, which he's not. Um, and owes me a fortune in royalties as the publisher, and he never paid them. It goes on and on like that. So each individual researcher has his own interactions with other researchers within the community. Um, Edward J. Epstein, his first book, fabulous, fabulous inquest. The second one he wrote, The Counterplot, horrible. He was the first researcher to sell out to the other side. An absolutely horrible book. And then Legend, the third book, is in some ways quite good. Some of his conclusions are off, but he sort of like came back halfway. So you've got that. I don't know. Sometimes I think the interaction with other researchers is in some ways one of the most frustrating parts of this whole job. I'll tell you what the most frustrating part is dealing with the occasional asshole downtown who, um, who will come and argue that Oswald was guilty and the Warren Commission was right and that we're all nuts and we're only in it for the money, that kind of a situation. We usually get like maybe two or three of those a month. Fortunately, it's not very much, but it's so frustrating because they're so close-minded, so stupid. They just simply will not look at the evidence. You try to tell them, well, what about the Dallas doctors? It just doesn't get through. It's like there's a brick wall in front of them, and they won't deal with the real evidence. They don't want to know what the evidence is. Their minds are made up, and they don't want to be confused with facts. This is very, very difficult to deal with, and we've got to deal with it all the time. Very sad. And when you see a father lying to his kids, Oswald fired from that window like that, and you try to explain it, no, it didn't happen that way. And they get belligerent, really nasty. And, you know, we're never going to change their minds because they don't really have a mind.